Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, with so much attention riveted on the race for the White House, it's easy to overlook the high-stakes battles over control of Congress. The Democrats hope to build on their razor-thin dominance in the Senate. We'll talk with Congressman Chris Van Hollen, who is leading the Democrats' efforts to extend his party's majority in the House of Representatives. Green is good for business. Customers feel virtuous in patronizing green products, which is why greenwashing is itself a growth industry, argues our guest Shawnee Hoover of Friends of the Earth. Also, we've got a poetry and photo feature by McLeman and Lloyd Grane.
I remember these things because I have killed him 1,000,000 times.
World beat and Irish music merge in the original sounds of Celtish. And we've got poets Ron Weber and Derrick Weston Brown.
Even Jordan did it. Developed a post-up spin-turn jumper and stutter step off of the dribble pull-up that still caught Kobe off guard. Drew a foul every time by playing on youth's anxiousness.
On the Coffee House. Welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. In less than 7 months, we'll know who our next president will be and which party will control Congress. Although lots can change between now and November, Democrats are poised to make significant gains again in Congress. In 2006, in the wake of the Jack Abramoff and Congressman Mark Foley scandals, Senator George Allen's macaca moment, and an increasingly unpopular war and president, Republicans lost control of both chambers. In the Senate, there are currently 49 Republicans and 49 Democrats and 2 independents who caucus with the Democrats. In the House, the margin is 233 to 202. The credit or blame for the Democratic performance in the House races this November will fall most heavily on 3-term rising star Representative Chris Van Hollen, who chairs the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and represents Maryland's 8th Congressional District bordering Washington, D.C. Welcome back to the Coffee House, Chris.
It's great to be with you, Mark.
In 2006, Democrats picked up, 29 House seats?
That's
6
right.
Senate seats. What do you think will happen this year?
Well, I think the momentum is still with us. I think politically people still want the country to move in a direction of change. They see the Bush administration as an obstacle to that change, and they see Republicans in the House and the Senate who have allied themselves for 7 years with the Bush administration as obstacles for change. So that dynamic helps us. Also, in the first 15 months of the new House, while we haven't done a lot of the things we've wanted to do, we have made progress on significant things. We increased the minimum wage. We finally raised the fuel efficiency standards for automobiles. We passed legislation to reduce the cost of college loans. We passed lobbying and ethics reform. So there have been some important successes as well. I would say, and this is a note of caution, that we have to beat history in order to pick up seats in the House of Representatives this time. What I mean by that is if you look at past elections where you had big gains by one party, as we did in 2006 midterms, the following cycle, the party that rode the wave, that benefited from the wave, tends to lose seats. The most recent example would be the 1994 Gingrich wave that came in, where between 1994 and 1996, Democrats came back and picked up a net of 9 seats. But we're trying to beat history, and right now I think we're on track to at least not lose any seats, and we're hoping to make gains.
Something like 61 House seats currently held by Democrats are in districts that George Bush won in 2004, and only a handful of seats that John Kerry, that are Republican controlled, that John Kerry won in those districts. Wouldn't that help the Republicans this time around?
Well, that's the math I give to our colleagues on the Democratic side when I tell them not to be too irrationally exuberant. And it's an important figure. You're right, there are 60 Democrats in the United States Congress today, the House of Representatives, who represent congressional districts that George Bush carried in 2004. There are only 8 Republicans in districts that were carried by John Kerry. So if you look at that math, you say, boy, the Republicans have a real chance now going into a presidential election year. What that number does not tell you that half of those 60 are Democrats who've already weathered the storm. In other words, they were on the ticket when George Bush won in 2004. So what we're really talking about are the new seats that we picked up. Most of what we call our frontline members, we have 30 frontline members. Most of them are new Democrats from some of these tough districts. Indiana is a very good example. We picked up 3 seats in Indiana in 2006. Now, Indiana, despite the best efforts of the Democrats, is likely to support the Republican candidate for president. I hope not, but it's likely to. What impact will that have on the 3 new members of Congress who are going through a presidential election cycle for their first time? I think they put themselves in a strong position. I think a lot of our new Democrats have put them in themselves in a strong position. And the good news is, because they've done that, we've been able to stay on offense. And while a lot of people thought we'd have to circle the wagons and just protect our gains, we've been able to stay on the offense.
And the evidence of putting themselves in a good position is in part that they've been more successful for the most part than Republicans, freshman Republicans, in raising money, about a 3-2 margin, isn't that right?
Yeah, they've been successful at raising money. A lot of them have been very successful on the legislative front. One of the things Speaker Pelosi did was give our new members of Congress sort of unprecedented ability to take charge and take a leadership role on important legislation. In fact, some of the members who have been around a long time, grumble a little bit because these new guys coming in have been allowed to sort of carry the ball on some very important issues. But it has allowed them to establish a strong legislative agenda at the same time that they're putting their campaigns in strong shape.
And there are other numbers that work well for the Democrats. Something like 29 Republicans are retiring.
Well, that's right. I mean, you've got, I think we're up to 30 now. It all depends on how you count exactly. But the fact of the matter is there are 30 plus Republicans retiring, and that does present opportunities for the Democrats. Some of these seats are in very tough areas, but we're still going to compete. Some of them are open seats. For example, we just had a big victory in a special election in Illinois. We won the seat that was held by the former Republican Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert. That was a district that was carried by George Bush by 58% of the vote. This is not a purple district, it wasn't a pink district, this was a red district, and our candidate covered. So these open seats do present big opportunities for the Democrats.
And another nice piece of information for the Democrats is that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which you chair, has something like $38 million on hand compared to about $5 million for the Republicans.
That's right. There's a big discrepancy between the two committees, and the fact of the matter is that energy that we saw in the midterm elections and that energy that we see around the presidential primary on the Democratic side has carried over to the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. We were very worried. We're in the middle of a presidential cycle. Would that mean that, everyone would be fighting for people's support, financial support? The good news is, at least so far, the rising tide has lifted all boats. Now, I do want to say one very important word of caution here for Democrats, which is that, yes, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee is doing much better than the National Republican Campaign Committee, the Republicans' political arm in the House. But 527s, there are these groups out there, 527s, that can spend millions and millions of dollars. In fact, there's no limit.
These are the swift vote type groups,
these are
the independent
organizations. Absolutely. These are the guys who swift voted John Kerry. These are the guys that, the amount of money that people can contribute to them is essentially unregulated.
Yeah, one of the leading organizations in this regard, Freedom Watch, lost its president in March because they apparently are having funding problems themselves.
Yes, they are. They have been having funding problems, but they've also expressed an intent to regroup and spend a lot of money, both in the presidential races as well as Senate and House races. They actually got involved in a special election we had in Ohio, which was an early warning signal to us that they intended to play in these congressional races.
They succeeded too.
They did. Now again, it was a Republican-held seat, very much. It was former Representative Gilmore's seat, very Republican seat. They were able to hold on, and the fact they had to spend money actually to hold a Republican seat was good news from a purely tactical sense for the Democrats. But what it indicated was a willingness to get involved, not just in national sort of presidential issues, but in congressional races. And they can be a major factor if they get organized. And the person they just hired as their director was the guy who used to head up the House Republicans communication system. And those guys really, I have to say, that even with the low standards we have today in national politics, those guys have ran ads that nonpartisan entities have just said are way below the belt, really down and dirty ads.
I'm wondering how your efforts to build support for congressional Democrats, House Democrats, fares in comparison to the Senate, where the margin is much thinner, and there seems to be more grassroots activist involvement in attempting to increase the margin on the Democratic side in the Senate.
Well, we're working very hard to try and make sure that people understand what's at stake in the House. That number one, we obviously have to maintain the gains we made, even though historically you really have to fight to do that because of what I talked about earlier. But second, that we have to have a working majority in the House. Now, obviously we want to increase our ranks in the Senate. One of the great frustrations all of us have is that important legislation that has passed the House, for example, improvements in our energy policy, improvements in a whole range of other important areas, have gotten stuck in the Senate because Republicans have filibustered it successfully. So we all want to grow our numbers in the Senate, but it would be a big mistake to do that by neglecting the importance of the House, because we have a very, very thin majority in the House, and it's a real challenge for Speaker Nancy Pelosi to put together a coalition of Democrats on any particular issue. And what we need to do is grow our ranks so that we can have a very progressive majority.
Assuming that you have a very successful November, you're not going to have such a successful November that you reach a veto-proof House, which would require, 290 votes?
Right, 2/3, right.
Yeah, and recently there was a vote, I think, that kind of dramatizes the effect of the veto, where President Bush vetoed the intelligence budget because the House version would have prohibited the CIA from varying from the Army Field Manual on torture.
Well, that's right, and it is unlikely that we'll have a veto-proof majority in the House. Certainly we won't have one in the Senate, which is why it's so important that we elect, from my perspective, a Democratic president, because if you really want to be able to move forward with a progressive agenda on health care, on energy policy, on undoing the damage that's been done by the Bush administration, on reestablishing our credibility overseas and restoring our moral standing, you are going to need a Democratic president in the White House. So that obviously is a priority. We just stress at the same time not to forget the fact that it doesn't do you a whole lot of good necessarily to have a Democratic president if you were to lose the House and the Senate, because you really need both branches of government to move this agenda forward. But you're right, if we don't have a president who is going to be against torture and against waterboarding, and if we don't have a president on these other issues, now the one you raised, just John McCain, that happens to be one of the issues where he is a little bit different than George Bush. But on other fundamental issues, whether it's the war in Iraq or our economic policy, John McCain is essentially an extension of George Bush.
We'll come back to this in a minute, and we'll let you talk about the presidential race in a bit. But I wanted to talk a little bit about who these House candidates are that are likely to win. And if you were to look at the spectrum within the Democratic contingent in the House, from the Yellow Dogs to the Progressive Caucus,
right,
where do these new Democrats who might be elected fit on this continuum?
Well, they fit really all along the spectrum, and it depends partly on what region of the country they come from. We have a lot of good prospects in the Mid-Atlantic and in the Northeast. Those Democrats tend to be more progressive, moderate Democrats, as do a number of the Democrats in the Southwest, Washington State, and from the sort of Midwest, in the Ohio area. Even in some of those regions, you find a mixture of folks with respect to sort of some of the cultural issues. For example, in Ohio, we have some candidates that are pro-gun safety, pro-gun control. We have some who are more, pro-NRA types. So there's a mix. Now, we do have a number of candidates in the South who are very culturally conservative Democrats. On bread and butter issues, on pocketbook issues, they will support the Democratic position. They'll want to raise the minimum wage. They want to make sure we have a health care system that works for everybody. They want to protect Social Security and retirement security. But when you're talking about some of the cultural issues, they're going to be more conservative. But overall, if you take all the candidates that are running now, if we could elect a large share of them, we will be able to move forward a progressive agenda much faster and in a more cohesive way than we have been so far.
What would you call success in November?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's a tough question. And it's a tough question because if you look historically, as I said, you would define success as just holding our own. And now, as DCCC, I obviously have a stake, Chairman, I have a stake in sort of managing expectations. But I will tell you, my very first day on this job, when I brought down our number gurus who looked at this, that is the way they define success. I mean, because they looked at it historically, and they saw that every time you have a wave election, the party that rode the wave in actually sees the wave recede a little bit. That's almost the definition of a wave. You pick up seats that you wouldn't otherwise pick up in a normal election year. And so our task then was to beat history. So I have not put any number on the
Congressional Quarterly says 85 seats are in play, or potentially in play this time.
Well, 85 seats, we've got a number around 75 to 85 in seats. Now, of course, 30 of those seats are Democratic seats that we're defending. And so then you've got between 40 and 50 Republican seats that we've put in play, and those range from seats that are currently open seats, where we have a very good chance right now, to seats that are tougher seats, but we have good candidates. And so I think it's too early. One of the big variables, of course, in addition to the 527s coming into play, the biggest variable is the presidential election race and the impact that can have in very tight districts on some of the congressional races around.
All right, let's play that out a little bit. Who will help the congressional candidates more, Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton, or does it matter on which district it is?
Well, that's a question on a lot of people's minds. Obviously, it's on the mind of a lot of members of Congress who are superdelegates and are trying to decide which of these candidates presents the best option for the country. And as part of that, they factor in how these candidates are going to play in their own backyards. And the only thing I can say with that, first of all, is as the chairman of the DCCC, I've remained neutral in this race because we work very closely with both presidential campaigns to help our own candidates, especially in these special elections. Barack Obama has been very helpful. He ran some ads for our candidate in Illinois, and the Clinton campaign's been involved in other ways as well. So the only way to really definitively answer that question is to sort of do polling in districts. And we've begun just now as part of our polling that we do in individual congressional districts to collect that information. And so maybe next time I come back on the show, we'll be able to have something that's actually statistically
Somehow I have a feeling it'll be decided by then.
Yeah, we'll see. No, I mean, seriously. The good news for the Democrats is that the energy and the excitement has been around the presidential primaries on the Democratic side. Huge turnouts compared to Republicans. Even before John McCain clinched the Republican nomination, when they still had competitive primaries, you saw these big turnouts. And that's obviously going to help whoever our nominee is, provided that our two candidates focus on what unites us and not on what divides us. And we have urged them, we at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, along with others, really focus on November, focus on the differences between our candidates and John McCain, because those differences are large, and the policy differences on most issues between the two Democratic frontrunners are very small. So let's not beat each other up over that in a way that could create wounds that will not heal by November.
All right, here's my theory, that the Democratic primary with Hillary Clinton being very aggressive toward Barack Obama will help him in the general election, and that he has been tested on the issues that John McCain will raise against him in the general election. On the other hand, Hillary Clinton hasn't been tested on the issues that will be raised about her if she's the nominee, because the Republicans, the 527 committees, will go down and dirty about the whole history of the Clinton administration and all of the bad karma that attends that. And and Obama hasn't raised any of that stuff during the campaign.
Right. Well, look, first let me say to Barack Obama's credit, I think he's been able to very effectively address the issues that have been thrown at him from all different sources, whether it's on national security issues or on domestic policy issues. And he's been able to, take the ups and downs, the roller coaster of a campaign, and he keeps on going. And to his credit, he's also brought a lot of people into the race, into the campaign, into the political process who are not involved, primarily a lot of young people. And so I think he has a great opportunity to garner a big turnout in November. Senator Clinton, what they would say in response to what you raised is, well, the fact of the matter is most Americans have already heard all those negatives about the Clintons. That her, one of the people falter for and say it makes her harder is she's got high negatives. They would say her negatives are probably at their upper limit because people have already absorbed the bad information, the negative information about the Clintons, and so there's not a whole lot more that they can go. So that's how they would respond to that. But I do think that the fact of the matter is that both candidates, whether in this campaign or earlier, have now been tested. I mean, but let's face it, whoever it is, they're going to take an additional pounding from the Republicans. And we talked earlier about the Swift boat ads. And one of the lessons Democrats should have learned, and I believe have learned, is not to let those kind of attacks go unanswered. The DCCC, we're certainly not going to allow them to go unanswered against our candidates. And I'm sure that at the national Democratic level in the presidential race, the same holds true.
You indicated to the people you're trying to help get elected that they should try to raise all the money they needed for their TV ads by March of this election cycle, which is 50-60% of the amount of money that they're going to have to raise in the campaign. Right. And this raises, I think, a very interesting issue about money in the election generally. How do you, as a Democrat and as a Democratic team, effectively compete in seeking money to run at these levels without ultimately selling your soul to the same special moneyed interests that you rail against when you're on the outs?
Sure. Well, one of the things I've been really pleased about is that the Democrats and the Democratic candidates have developed a much broader base of support than Republican candidates who depend disproportionately on special interest political action committee money and very narrow special interest money. One of the phenomena, of course, we've seen in the Barack Obama campaign is the ability to raise money in small amounts over the internet. And we have encouraged our candidates to do the same thing, to make sure that they try and reach out to a broad base of supporters so they don't become overly dependent on a few sources of contributions. That doesn't make sense from a pure campaign perspective, and also from the perspective of the public interest. I don't think we want any members of Congress who are sort of dependent on one source of funding.
Well, let's assume a greater diversity of sources of money. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, candidates are forced to spend, and as an incumbent, you spend more and more time chasing money in order to be able to conduct a campaign that's competitive, and that's time that isn't spent presumably on watching after the national interest.
Well, there's no doubt that the system that we've got requires people to spend, I think, way too much time raising money for campaigns. I mean, it's absolutely essential that people be able to have the resources to get their message out. We have a system where any multimillionaire can file anytime to run. In fact, part of the Republican strategy, they've been so unsuccessful at recruiting candidates who have sort of broad community support that they've gone on a millionaire recruitment strategy. So people have to be prepared to get their message out. That's one of the reasons I've been supporting campaign finance reform. And I do hope that in the next Congress.
But isn't it a conundrum that if you're successful in this system, in raising money and being able to conduct an effective, successful campaign, that you have less of an interest, in fact, a stake in the current system as it's structured, where that's not a public finance system? How do you get to a clean election public finance system when the successful people are the ones who have profited by the system as it is?
It's a great question, because there's no doubt that the funding system we have now generally favors incumbents over non-incumbents. But that doesn't mean that there are not a lot of people in the Congress today that want to change the system, that don't want to spend time raising money. And I'm pleased to be a co-sponsor of the Clean Elections bill that calls for public funding, because I believe one of the most important things we can do, whether you care about energy policy, healthcare policy, or any of these other issues, is try and reduce the impact of special interest money on the overall process. And if you look at that bill and you look at the co-sponsorship of the bill, it's overwhelmingly Democratic, which is interesting because there are Republican incumbents, there are Democratic incumbents, but Democrats have been much more willing to say, let's shake up the system, let's move to public financing, and therefore, if we have a Democratic president, I think we have an opportunity to do this. That having been said, let me say there is a lot of resistance even on the Democratic side. One of the things I pushed for in this last lobbying and ethics reform bill was simply to require the disclosure of bundling. When people ask people to raise money in bundles for them, I said, let's have some transparency. And while I was successful at getting that through, and as part of the bill, in fact, Barack Obama and Senator Feingold were the Senate sponsors of that measure, while we were able to get it through, I can tell you we did encounter a lot of resistance, not just from the Republicans, but from a lot of our own colleagues. And there was a period of time we used to joke that I'd have to go out and have someone start my car and sort of check my car out before I started it, because there are a lot of people that don't even want that level of disclosure. To her great credit, Speaker Pelosi said we're going to do this and worked with us to get it done, as did Harry Reid. So yes, this is a major challenge to change the funding system in our country. The Supreme Court decisions have not helped us in that regard, but it's something I think we need to do.
We've got 1 more minute left. I want to ask you in that time to talk a little bit about what needs to be done in terms of mortgage foreclosures.
Well, in a minute, I think that a couple things. Number one, we need to make sure that people who are facing these crises get the information necessary to make smart decisions. That's easier said than done, so we've been doing that. Number two, in the House, we're pushing for a bill. The primary sponsor is Barney Frank. He's the chairman of the Financial Services Committee, that creates great inducements, incentives to lenders to write down the value of the loan to the principal of the house at current value, and allow the homeowner to stay there and negotiate a lower rate. If the value of the house goes up later, the government would then have a stake in it, but they would guarantee the payments at the lower level if the homeowner passes certain tests.
The government has a stake. What does that mean?
Well, it means if the value of the house, if the government is going to guarantee the loan payments at a lower reduced level, there should be an upside to taking that risk, which means that the people, the Treasury, would have some stake if the value of the house went up. The other thing I think we need to do, unfortunately this was defeated in the Senate the other day, is reform our bankruptcy laws to allow the bankruptcy judge to make changes, adjustments in the mortgage payments so they can do a workout plan. You can do that for your yacht. You can do that if you have a second home. But you cannot currently do that for the home that you live in. I think we need to change that.
That about exhausts our time. Many thanks to Congressman Chris Van Hollen for sharing his views on the 2008 elections and more. Always a pleasure.
Good to be with you.
I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum.
And I have killed a man, and I have killed a man. I repeat it to myself as it was a world ago, before this long wait. I remember the blood-caked hands congealing the blood in my heart, his final frozen face filling my head and stealing my life away. I remember these things because I have killed him 1,000,000 times, and each time now it's different, and each time I'm nearer my own murder. But they will have no caked blood to remember, only a chair.
Sometimes you gotta find a way around them young cats. Cornelius Eady. 1. Miles had to do it. Toward the end, he only peppered his tracks with muted trumpet bursts. Freddie Hubbard did too. See, you gotta realize he was an old geezer by then, and you gotta find your way around those young cats that step into the game hungry, cocksure, looking for belts to take, starting spots. Even Jordan did it. Developed a post-up spin-turn jumper and stutter step off of the dribble pull-up that still caught Kobe off guard. Drew a foul every time by playing on youth's anxiousness. Because you got to find your way around them young cats. I almost fought an older man over a woman once. Stepped to him with barehanded thunder and lightning, cursing, "I'm going to kick your rusty butt. You ain't my daddy. Prove it then." He didn't even breathe hard when he pulled out his .22. I pulled out my deepest apologies, let the bass air out of my voice like a punctured tire, a shrieking, deflated balloon. "Sir, please forgive my trespasses and transgressions. I meant no disrespect. I'll be on my way. Won't darken your doorstep. Excuse me, my bad, sir, Mr. Sir." See, he found a way around this young cat.
Welcome to 21st Century Life here at the Coffee House. The nation's capital has a brand new Major League Baseball park, the first ever built with so-called quote-unquote green features. The $611 million park for the Washington Nationals includes such eco-amenities as an in-house recycling center, copious bicycle racks, energy-efficient lighting, and a special low-flow plumbing system. This is all good, of course, but fans at the recent opening day also saw a lot that was decidedly ungreen. The most dominant advertiser in the park is controversial oil giant ExxonMobil, a bigger contributor to global warming than any other company in the world. The entire left field fence wall actually is plastered with the ExxonMobil logo, and the seventh inning stretch was announced as the quote ExxonMobil seventh inning stretch, with the company's ads dominating the huge scoreboard as parents and children saying, "Take me out to the ball game." But here's the question: can any building be truly green architecturally if it's virtually painted with the ads of a mega polluter? Should the Nationals baseball team ban ExxonMobil from advertising? And why won't Exxon just stop quote-unquote greenwashing its product to begin with? Here to discuss this issue is Shawnee Hoover. She is Legislative Director for Friends of the Earth here in Washington, D.C., and former director of the nationwide campaign called Expose Exxon. Shawnee, welcome to the Coffee House.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Well, first of all, I know that Friends of the Earth was opposed to the building of a new stadium because RFK Stadium, the old one, seemed fine enough. Why spend $600 million on a new park when you could take that same money and spend it on hospitals or other social features? But the park got built. And they have these green features. How did the architects do, in your view, in terms of these green building features for this new Major League ballpark?
Well, I think actually they've done an excellent job. I mean, the savings on electricity is going to be massive. The savings on water is huge. I mean, they're saving over 6 million gallons of water at minimum. These are great features. It's obviously built right on the metro, right near the metro, which is much better than RFK was. So it's fantastic that they're attempting to create a model, really, for the rest of the nation.
And I think the National Green Buildings Council is about to certify them as officially a green building, the first sports stadium in America like that.
Right.
But so ExxonMobil,
All right.
biggest global warming polluter in the world, huge ads in the park, the Green Park. Were you surprised by this? I mean, can it be green?
Yeah, actually, I was not surprised. I'm disappointed. I'm not exactly surprised because ExxonMobil has been spending millions and millions of dollars on a new PR campaign. And what better way to get into the hearts of people in Washington, D.C., right, than get straight to National Stadium.
Have they done this anywhere else? Has ExxonMobil advertised like this in other sports arenas that you're aware of?
Not that I know of. I have actually never seen this kind of advertising before. This could be unprecedented. I'm not quite sure.
So it's no accident that they began these sort of advertising in Washington versus Columbus, Ohio or something.
Right. I really don't think it's an accident. Across the nation, they've been spending millions of dollars on TV ads, on newspaper ads, radio ads, and now we see, at the stadium, obviously there's policymakers here in the nation which are deciding if they are going to continue giving over $30 billion of taxpayer money to the oil and gas industry as subsidies and tax breaks. The real challenge for us here is not just that it's an oil company on a green stadium, but particularly that it's ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil actually is the worst of the oil companies on global warming particularly. They have been denying global climate change, the science.
So of all the oil companies in the world, ExxonMobil has had the most problematic stance on climate change.
They have. They have. For over a decade, they've been denying the science. They've been funding organizations and also front groups that deny the science of global warming, that deny.
Do they still do it? I mean, after Katrina and An Inconvenient Truth and global warming's on the front page of every newspaper and magazine, does ExxonMobil still fund deniers?
They do. They do. They began cutting funding last year after this major campaign, Expose Exxon, which was run by several of the nation's largest environmental groups, from Sierra Club to Greenpeace, also including Friends of the Earth and many others, who were really trying to educate the American public and policymakers about Exxon's role in the Bush administration in crafting the United States policy on global warming, which, as we know, is quite ineffective and voluntary and just really not getting us where we need to go, as well as the company's very adamant stance against renewable energy. ExxonMobil is the only oil company, major oil company, that refuses to invest in renewable energy like wind and solar.
So you have British Petroleum, which is spending money on renewable. They call themselves Beyond Petroleum. You have Shell that's investing. ExxonMobil invests nothing at all in renewable energy?
Right, nothing that can be deployable today, like wind or solar and things that other oil companies like Shell and BP is spending like $8 billion, $10 billion over the next 8 years. Shell has invested billions of dollars as well.
Why not? I mean, here's ExxonMobil. They're advertising in a national baseball park in Washington, D.C. That's got to cost. I mean, literally in the seventh inning stretch, all the electronic ads, all the ribbon of ads around the park were all lit up with ExxonMobil imagery. The largest scoreboard in America now is at Nationals Park in Washington. It's high def. It was all ExxonMobil imagery, left field wall, etc. Why spend all that money on advertising in a green ballpark but not spend $1 on renewable energy investment?
Right.
I mean, that seems, in terms of a PR strategy, illogical.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of the issues with ExxonMobil, what really makes it stand out is that it actually has a much more different culture than the other oil giants. It's much more of a dinosaur in the sense that it absolutely refuses to read the writing on the wall. It refuses to see itself as an energy company. It says the leaders say we do oil, that's all we're ever going to do. They make fun of renewable energy like biofuels. They call them all sorts of names and ridicule renewable energies. And now the situation is that clearly renewable energy, there is no silver bullet to our energy problem. And that is true. But at the same time, these companies need to be part of the solution. I mean, ExxonMobil made $40 billion last year.
$40 billion. That's more than I make in a month.
That's more than any corporation has ever made in human history.
Well, let's talk about another corporation, the Nationals baseball team. I mean, Major League Baseball is a business. It is.
Right.
A lot of players make a lot of money. The Nationals, all the teams make money. Should the Nationals, I mean, they've gotten lots of press from this green park. I mean, lots and lots of the green features, and I mean, we're talking about it.
Right.
Energy efficiency, water savings, et cetera, et cetera. But can a building truly be green architecturally if you have polluters advertising on that level? Is it what should happen? Do you think the Nationals should reject and no longer accept money from ExxonMobil?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very clear that green is not just a fad. It's not just something to do because you're going to get publicity, but that you actually have to be taking a holistic approach. Now there are plenty of advertisers that would love to do that 7-inning stretch right there. It's absolutely important that the marketers speak to the facilities management who are making these great gains, that are taking a baseball stadium, making it a model for the rest of the nation, and absolutely put them together and pick some advertisers that are not blocking action on global warming, that are investing in renewable energy, that are actually trying to see themselves as part of the solution and not the problem.
And there are people who would say, oh, you can't, come on, you can't just deny certain advertisers, but we do it with tobacco, right?
Sure, we certainly do. And in fact, ExxonMobil has been using the tobacco industry's tactics to block action on global warming. So that's a very good example. Would you want to go to the baseball stadium and see Marlboro plastered all over the walls? I don't think so, and I don't think we should be seeing ExxonMobil either.
When I was a kid growing up in Atlanta, the Atlanta Braves Stadium, the #1 advertiser was Marlboro. It was Marlboro Man up there in the outfield.
And we've grown.
Well,
right?
why after Katrina and An Inconvenient Truth and all the awareness on global warming, it just seems, frankly, astonishing that you could have this ballpark so stamped with an oil company. Is it your view that this could set a trend that ExxonMobil could? I mean, the naming rights, for example, for the park hasn't even happened yet. Do you think that it's plausible that they will push this even further?
It's a very dangerous road to go down. I mean, the environmental community has been working extremely hard to educate policymakers, the American public, and to persuade a lot of the corporations across the United States, many of which are taking very good actions and believe in placing mandatory pollution requirements, reduction requirements on on business. ExxonMobil is absolutely adamant against these progressive actions, and I think that the stadium would find itself in a very uncomfortable predicament if they continue down this road, I mean, to be named after an oil company in this day and age when we know that the future is renewable energy.
But one would presume that you wouldn't even have ExxonMobil sponsoring the 7th-inning stretch at Nationals Park either. And we don't have that much time left, but I mean, the Anacostia River, the river that the Nationals ballpark is on in Washington, D.C., is a tidal river, meaning it's influenced by sea level rise. And the field is actually 20 or more feet below sea level. I mean, the park itself could be flooded. Does ExxonMobil believe that global warming is happening? What do they say about that?
They've just recently, last year, said that global warming was a problem, but they do not recognize that ExxonMobil has any real role to play in solving the problem. Now, this is a corporation that's making $40 billion a year, that is investing in oil and gas exploration, but not a dime in renewable energy like wind and solar to help transform our nation off of fossil fuels, which we know are causing global warming and all these other problems. So clearly that's a problem.
Well, listen, a big thanks to Shawnee Hoover of Friends of the Earth for discussing ExxonMobil's new controversial effort to burnish its image at America's newest and quote-unquote greenest baseball diamond right here in Washington, D.C. Whether this is a truly green baseball park or just greenwashing, I'm sure we'll hear much more about this issue in the coming months. I'm Mike Tidwell.
The Republic has new clothes. Its leader knows his mind and says so. What he thinks is hard to say. Ideas are shadows a cloud casts. An empire is hard to see. It looks like the world. fiber optic cable hums like neurons beneath the face. The sky is democratic. Sun shines on aristocrat and hobo alike. Rain, when it falls, is justified. The books are cooked by a chef. The public can rest secure. The president's men dream his dreams. All night they toss and turn. Policy makes the enemies it was tailored for. What has been locked up stays locked up. The war on terriers goes well. Public confidence has reached a pinnacle. Good soldiers storm the mall with their wallets open wide. The soul is a picture window. A strong man looks his evil twin eye to eye. Comparing prices is transformational. Higher mathematics fit ethics into a shoe. It's time to give the soul a boot. Hands lead a blind man up the summit of Mount Everest. Unassuming modesty is assumed. Let's roll. Behind this kingdom is another. Its ruler sits on a throne. He sleeps until he wakes. When his eyes open, it is a terrible sight.
A coaxing elf, sure I shook myself for to see if I was really there. From Bantry Bay to Derrick, and from Galway to Dublin town. Well, no maid I've seen like the brown Colleen that I met in the county down. As she onward sped, sure I shook my head and I looked with a feeling rare. Then I says I, to a passer-by, who's the maid with the nut-brown hair? He smiled at me and he said, says he, that's the gem of Ireland's crown. Well, young Rosie McCann from the banks of the Ben, she's the star of the county down. From Bantry Bay and to Derrick, and from Galway to Dublin town. No maid I've seen like the brown Colleen that I met in the county down. With my shoes shone bright and my hat cocked right for a smile from a nut-brown rose. No pipe I'll smoke, no horse I'll yoke, till my plough lies rust-colored brown. Well, till a smiling bride by my own fireside sits the star of the county down. From Bantry Bay and to Derrick, and from Galway to Dublin town. No maid I've seen like the brown Colleen that I met in the county down. I've seen like the brown collie that I met in the county down, that I met in the county down, that I met in the county down.
Welcome, Keltish. Welcome to the Coffee House.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to have you guys here. So that was like a bluesy version of it.
Yeah.
So now I get it. You guys basically take a tune that's traditional, put your stamp on it.
That's right. That's right. Always trying to do something. We've incorporated things from all kinds of different musical backgrounds, jazz, folk, other forms of traditions beyond just Irish or Celtic. There's even a little Middle Eastern rhythm in a few of the things that we do.
And then what happens is people come out, they hear you, and they go, oh, you got to hear their version of. And they kind of twist it and turn it. It makes it fun for you guys.
Right, exactly, exactly. We were told that last song, Star of the County Down, is like the most overused Irish song ever. And so we wanted to do something fun with it.
Yeah, yeah. I picture like a blues club, you know, low lights, low lifes even, you know, sliding in.
Oh, we fit right in.
Kind of slinking around, and it's very cool. How do you decide, I'm going to put this song in the repertoire, or no, we're not going to do it? Is it a, you know, is it a democracy? Is it, you know, a dictatorship?
Oh, no, I think we kind of share a brain cell between the three of us.
Okay.
Generally speaking, if one person doesn't like a thing, the other people are not attached to it, and we haven't had any real conflict about that. It's just sort of like, well, this sounds good, let's keep it. That doesn't, we move on.
Are there some artists that you all sort of agree on, like, oh, let's do a Richard Thompson tune, or oh, let's do Doogie McLean, or is there anybody that...
Janie
local,
McNeely,
yeah. A good plug for a local songwriter. That's good.
No, it's more like the feel. I mean, we don't want to get too close to any one person's style or one group's style. We want to kind of make it our own, so we borrow from genres, but not necessarily from people.
A tough thing for groups, and I'm guessing that you guys end up in a lot of pubs and fairly sort of public places. How do you handle requests?
We either know them and we do them.
Yeah, well, yes, that's
or
the
we
easy
don't, and we tell them, we'll do that for you next year.
Okay. And do you see we're in the Washington area here, is there a core of fans that kind of look for your gigs? And
Yes, definitely. We even do some house concerts in my living room, and we invite people in, and the same few people tend to come each time.
Yeah. Where are you living?
The beauty of that is about being it online.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
We do live concerts through the internet as well. So but two of us are in Reston, the other's a little further out in Fairfax, but it's close enough.
Yeah. Okay, so what are you going to take us out with?
We're going to do, and I keep saying the wrong thing, it's going to be
Rattling.
Rattling Bog and John Ryan's. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.